So, welcome to Tom Evans, my good friend. I've known Tom for I don't know how many years, at least 10 or 11, when we used to meet in a train station in London when I was passing through, I seem to remember. But I actually don't remember how we first met. But thank you very much for coming to my first interview like this. We're going to talk today about writer's block and about getting over writer's block. I know that I think you are an expert. Several years ago, I've got to try and get this on my camera. I can't show
Just
it.
hold it in front of your body. That's it.
There we go. This is Tom's book that he wrote and published in 2009, but I actually knew Tom before that book, and I used blocks and found it incredibly helpful. So Tom and I are both no stranger to writer's block, and we're going to talk about getting over writer's block and how Tom got over his own writer's block during this session today. So welcome, Tom, and could you start off by telling us a little bit about you, please?
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here, and I hope everyone that's listening is safe and well. I got into writing in my mid to late 40s. Before that, I was a BBC TV engineer. Then I formed my own broadcast manufacturing business. Then I got into and built an internet business. In my mid 40s, like many people, I got a bit disillusioned with corporate life, and I didn't really have a midlife crisis. I had more like a midlife hiccup, and I just sort of threw my toys out the pram. And for the first time in my life, I gave up a perfectly good job without one to go to, and I sort of ambled around for a while and found Academy, and I think that's where we met, actually, the Network Academy. And there was another writer's mentor on there, Mindy Gibbons Klein.
Yes.
Yeah, and I said I would like to write a book, and so she mentored me through what was the book I've now finally published, and I never got to write the book. I wrote another book called 100 Years of Ermentrude, and that book came out maybe well before ebooks and audiobooks came out, but I made it into an ebook and audiobook, and something happened then which I wasn't expecting. People said to me, "You've written a book. Can you help me write a book?" And I became an author's mentor by accident. I thought this was my calling, and I did a few, probably, I don't know, 100 clients or so, and then I'd say 50% of them got stuck, and I didn't have any tools on how to help them get unstuck. So I went on an NLP course and even a past life regression course, and I discovered that every single case of writer's block was actually a life block manifesting as writer's block. So I learned how to coach people through these blocks and how every single block was really a fear manifesting. And like all these people, I became quite good at it and got a much better success rate. Maybe 99, even 95% of people that work with me will actually get their books out and done. Because there's also a thing which I didn't write about in blocks called author's block, which is the block you have after you publish the book. We maybe touch on that later. And so, but like all these people that at the time were touting themselves around as a coach in this and that, I thought, well, I better have the book that goes with the service that I'm providing. So that's when I wrote blocks.
Wow. And I found it incredibly helpful. And thank you for explaining why you wrote it.
Mm.
They say that we write the material that we need to learn ourselves. So you were actually studying it in order to help your clients. But would you also say that you were creating the material you also needed to learn from?
I understand that, and I would agree with it in most cases. But in my case, it wasn't so much that. I was merely building my profile up with the appropriate content that went with it. But I did something then, even back then, that led to a completely different career shift about 4 or 5 years later. I think Blocks came out in 2009, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
And so I thought that it would be a good idea, because I've studied hypnotherapy, if some of the states of consciousness that I described in the book, rather than just writing about them in theory, if I took people through a guided visualization that let them enter that state of consciousness. So I started putting these meditations with the book. So Blocks came with 6 meditations to help you unblock yourself. And so that was the real key. So I didn't realize that that's where my real forte lay, in creating these state changes of consciousness, and that led to me about 6 years later becoming a full-blown meditation guide without having gone inside an ashram to study mindfulness or meditation. In fact, then all my books after that came with accompanying meditations, and in fact they're all available now for free as well. So I've just put the whole archive out for free recently, which is kind of interesting. So I suppose my block was I wouldn't have ever dared to claim to be something I'm not. And the book allowed me to be an authority around writer's block, which was useful. And then the meditations allowed me to be and led me to be an authority in the meditation space. And I suppose my biggest block is, imposter syndrome.
Mm.
So, how can I be someone that's an expert in writer's block who hasn't got a book on it? And how can I be a meditation guide without meditations that have got a good track record now and millions of listens?
Yeah, I completely understand that. And so you were creating your own authority, which is and
Yeah,
books are a
rather than
fantastic tool.
yeah, myself. I was getting the blocks out of the way through whoever I was before. So this imposter who was making it up as he went along, that kind of thing. But I wasn't using it to creatively unblock myself.
I see.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit later about some of your meditations. So I don't really want to go into that now.
Okay.
What I really want to talk about is some of the other ways that people can unblock themselves apart from the meditation, which, as I said, we'll get into later.
Sure.
So I remember in your book vividly that you taught me about cross-crawling.
Yeah.
And it's something that I still use. And in fact, when I'm running some of my writing retreats, I encourage people to do some cross-crawling. So could you just tell the listeners today what cross-crawling is?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a great question. Thank you. First of all, why would you cross-crawl? And, this sort of, it's an urban myth really that the left brain is logical and the right brain is creative. There's a fantastic book by a guy called Ian McGilchrist called The Master and His Emissary, which is a neuroscientific view of what the left and right brain do, with years and years of study now. So it looks more like that the left brain sits inside space and time and looks at detail, and the right brain, in most people, sits outside space and time and looks at the big picture. So when you get, I've got some exercises for this, and I'll show you a brief one now, which isn't cross-crawling because I've got to stand up to do cross-crawling, but we'll explain it. So when you do cross-crawling, what happens is it moves the cerebrospinal fluid around in your brain and you enter the whole brain state. So you're able, while working on one thing, to see the detail while still holding the big picture. So let's say you're writing a book. You could be writing one sentence and knowing that sentence, the context of the sentence in the whole of the rest of the book. And one of the things I learned ages ago when I studied hypnotherapy is the concept of nested loops. And also writing using hypnotic language, which is that's how you create a page turner. And I think I used a phrase somewhere in one of my books that you write in trance and then you entrance your reader. And using these suggestions, so a certain line, let's say, right in the center of a book, might actually lead to something in the last chapter. In fact, in blocks, I think it's in chapter 1. There's some Sanskrit. You've seen that little line of Sanskrit in the book?
I've forgotten.
Is in there, and in Sanskrit it says publish your book, not write your book. So there's an embedded command in a language which your conscious mind doesn't understand, but your unconscious mind does, because we know all languages inherently, even though we might have forgotten them. So so to answer your question, that when you cross-crawl, you get into this whole brain state. I'll give you a very quick, I will explain what cross-crawling is. Very quick way of doing it is just to hold one of your nostrils closed and then breathe in and out through the other nostril 4 or 5 times, and then flip over and do it that way. But cross-crawling, it involves you taking your, let's say, your right elbow, and then if your back isn't bad, just lifting up your left knee and getting as close to your left knee as you can, but most importantly, crossing the center line of your body. Then you do the same on the other side. And have you got a bad back? You can just do it with your hands, sort of doing that and then doing that. But here's the weird thing. If you lie down on a bed and imagine you're doing the physical activity, it has the same effect as well. It's kind of weird. So all it does is move the left and right, the fluid around in your brain to activate the left and right hemispheres at the same time.
Wow. So That's much more complicated than I remembered it, because I just remembered it as about crossing my arms and
Yeah,
the opposite, to touch the opposite knees as
yeah,
you're walking. So I tend to incorporate it into a mindful
yeah. You
walk,
can just do it as a walk as well. Yeah, it works great. Yeah.
which interestingly is something that I noticed when I was living in Malaysia. I noticed an awful lot of Chinese people were walking around the botanical gardens near where I lived, doing exactly that with their limbs very, very slowly.
Hmm. Well,
So
it's
I
a kind
don't
of it's a yoga move, and if you think about yoga, it means union, and when you get into the whole brain state,
know.
then you get this union. And the Greeks knew about this. They had two gods, the god of Kronos and the god of Kairos. And Kronos looked after the earth, and Kairos looked after the heavens. And Kronos is kind of the state your left brain is in, and Kairos is the dreamy state your right brain is in. So when you get Kronos and Kairos working together, that's when you enter this other state. Actually, in later works, I even defined it as being EMT. It's called extended me time.
Very good. Very good. So cross crawling is a simple thing that we can do, which kind of gets you thinking more creatively and allows you, as you just said, to go for the big picture and the detail at the same time, which I know is an art. So that's something that we can all adopt straight away. The other thing that I remember from your book that I found really helpful, and I used again and again and teach my students to do as well, is to mind map your way out
Mm-hmm.
of block. Perhaps you could just say a little bit about how you think that can be used.
Well, mind maps they're a whole brain device. So the actual detail on a mind map. So you start with a central concept, right? So let's say I'm writing a book like Blocks. In fact, in the book Blocks is a mind map of the book, and you can mind map the chronology of a book. You know, like so this is chapter 1, this is chapter 2, and chapter 3. One of the exercises I did with writers was to do the reader journey. So chapter 1 isn't about this and that. It's like I change the reader. That's the reader starting state. And after chapter 1, they're at this state. Then after chapter 2, they're at another state. So you map not the content of the book, but you map the intended reader change of state through the book, whether it's in fiction or non-fiction. But the best mind maps are just free association, because our brain doesn't think in lists, it thinks radially. So they're very good tools for kids for revision. They're good for doing shopping lists. So you can say, right, here's all my groceries, here's all my fresh veg, here's the protein I'm going to have, here's the liquids I'm going to have, and what have you. Here's the non-edible bits of grocery. And then you're just going to remember those groups. Great for doing that. But where they come into their own is when you use them for free association. And I did this when I wrote the book After Blocks, which was about light bulb moments. So once you're unblocked, how do you tap into unlimited inspiration? I was stuck on chapter 9, and so I did a mind map. And what you do is you take the words light bulb moment. If you put light bulb moment on a mind map and free association, where you go aha moment, eureka moment, and you might say Archimedes' bath and that sort of stuff. But I took the word light, I took the word bulb, and I took the word moment, and I free associated off each of those. So from bulb, you'd appreciate this, you go to tulip and Amsterdam. From moment, you go, oh, moment. It's not just a moment in time, but a lever has a moment as well. So a lever has a moment. And then with the word light, I went, oh, light. So light goes into spectrum, prisms, Pink Floyd, because the dark side of the moon. And I went, oh, if light is split into 3 sections, and thought is also a wave, maybe thought has different colors. And I was thinking about fundamental particles like quarks, because I'm a bit of a techie nerd, and quarks have flavors. And then the light bulb moment came in, flavors of thought, and that became the book after that. So it became the chapter I was stuck on in the book Light Bulb Moments, and it also led into a whole new book after that. So they're great ways of you free associating the mind away from any linear structure and going to places that you didn't think you were going to ever end up.
My goodness, how exciting. What's your particular favorite, but I would also like to just say simplest way of unblocking that you consider to be a really easy, tangible thing for the people who are watching today?
I'm so lucky. I've got 2 Labradoodles, and I take them out for a walk, and the idea comes in. But also, I do have quite a connection with what we could call the collective consciousness. And another way of doing it is you just ask.
Mm.
So you just form a question in your mind. You can do it before you go to sleep, and you can dream about it. And you just ask for the solution, and often it arrives. But and this is where meditation's the key. I know we're going to talk about it later. With it, what meditation teaches you is how to have a quiet mind, and also to recognize thought forms that aren't your own. So that idea of flavors of thought came in from not my internal process, but from whatever the collective is.
Mm.
And then I thought, oh, that's a great thought, and then it all goes from there. So either going out walking in nature, or just asking, and then keeping a quiet mind, not being anxious about the sign, or being prescriptive about the form it comes in.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. I am a firm believer in going out in nature. That's what I do when I'm feeling blocked. I go out, and I go out alone, and I just allow my thoughts to wander, and the ideas generally come to me. But I'm also usually additionally inspired to write other things just by being there, which I find very helpful.
May I share, to answer that question, can I also share a kind of very unusual, it's not quite scatological, but the water is the conductor of what's called the universal mind stuff. That's a kind of metaphysical concept.
Mm.
If you have a shower, many people report having light bulb moments in a shower, or walking out in a waiter. If I was doing one-to-one coaching, in the middle of it, we wanted a comfort break, so the client would go for a pee, and so would I. The process of peeing, I had to say, in two different loos, seemed to also induce this process. I've just got to share it with you because it's kind of true, and it seemed to work so many times. And we come back and, oh, we know where we're going now.
How interesting.
Yeah.
How interesting. Do you think it's actually the peeing, or it's the washing of the hands afterwards?
I think it's the
That's two
connection
lots
with
of
the
water.
water. It's the connection with the water element.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Do you also think that would happen if somebody burst into tears then? If you could induce tears, that would create water, and that would do the same thing.
We wouldn't necessarily want to use that as a process, but why not?
That might work as well. So let's move on to something else. This is becoming a very metaphysical conversation, but we're now going to go into something else equally, perhaps for some people, wacky. When you wrote Soul Waves, which is your most recent book, you channeled it.
Yeah, that's Soul Waves.
Soul Waves. Oh, you made a
There.
much better job of holding it up than I did your book. Can you explain how the process worked in very simple terms?
Yeah, so channeling, right? I used to do these writers' workshops, and some people that came to the workshop said, "You seem to have taught me how to channel." And all I was doing was getting them to tap into free flow imagination. So all I call channeling. But what I did, I went and studied it with some people. So some people channel the fairies at the bottom of the garden, or the angels, or the archangels. I don't know who or what I'm channeling, so I don't have a being that comes through me and gets me to speaking strange voices.
Hmm.
I don't channel dear departed Aunt Muriel or Uncle Bob or anything like that. And channeling, I call it, it's more like when a musician says, oh, I channeled these influences from the past and what have you, or an actor might say, I'm trying to portray this role, so I don't know, Churchill or something like that, so I'm just channeling Churchill in my acting. So I call channeling tapping into whatever your creative flow is, or creative source is, your muse if you like, and you getting out of the way. But specifically in the context of Soul Waves, what I channeled was it's a book that's set in the future. So it starts in 2058, so about just less than 40 years from now. Based in Beijing, flies through Wuhan a few times, and it's fairly apocalyptic. It's an apocalypse movie, you like, but it's also a story of hope and evolution. So I channeled the future version of me who knew the words I hadn't written yet.
My goodness.
And that's just imagination. So just imagine that's just imagination. It seems to work. So there's a version of you in the future who's read your book because you've written it, and you just channel that version of you.
So it's about losing control and trusting the moment and getting out of your own way and putting your fingers on the keyboard or your pen on paper and just going without
All of those,
censor, yeah?
all of those, apart from losing control, you're still in control. But you can do what's called passive channeling, where it's just you literally sit. And this is like Julia Cameron's Morning Pages, where you just let whatever flow through. That's called like a passive channel, or you're just doodling or something like that.
Yeah.
I call this active channeling. So you're channeling into a framework. So in the case of Soul Waves, the book had a start, middle, and an end, and I knew what the chronology of the book was. So I'd say, right, today I'm channeling this bit of future history. I'm channeling what happened in 2079. So that's definitely in control. But what I'm writing about 2079 in the future, I'm just allowing to flow.
Yeah, so I think you're calling it channeling, but I probably call it being in the zone.
It's the same. I'd call it that too, because as you know, I have the Zone Show
I
podcast.
do.
They're all synonymous, and I never define what I am. I'm only what clients have said I am. So I've got one client who used to call me Dumbledore, but by way of balance, my wife called me Dobby the house elf, if you know what I mean. So but someone said, oh, you're a channel, or you're a wizard of lightful moments, or I've had temporal alchemist and what have you. But these are all flavors of Tom, not what I'd call myself. And so I only use the word channeling in the context of people that find it a comfortable word to use. And if I'm talking inside a business, doing a corporate talk or something, I'd call it getting in the zone or something like that.
Yeah, I think I feel more comfortable with getting in the zone, and that is something that I can do. And I find that it's just giving myself permission to write whatever comes into my head, but I craft it at the same time. I would also say that with practice and with a certain amount of being able to trust yourself, it becomes much easier to get into the zone and be at the same time both letting something just flow through you, but also keeping control over it.
Yeah. I think the control is important, because that's the discipline that differentiates you between someone that just does some random writing for their own amusement and somebody that actually goes through the whole process through to publishing and sharing it with the world.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Elizabeth Gilbert, in her book Big Magic, which I read recently, says that ideas kind of land on us and then hang around for a while to see if we're going to do anything with them. And if we don't do anything with them, they head off and land on someone else. I do actually believe that. I believe that if an idea comes to you, and I call them bonks on the head. I always think that if something comes and bonks you on the head once, that's something. But if it keeps bonking you on the head, you've got to do something with it. And if you don't do something with it, somebody else will grab it. What do you have to say about that?
I totally agree. And in fact, I experienced that well before I became this incarnation of me, the writer meditation guide. When I was in business, I was very inventive. And there was one particular invention that I came up with in the late 80s, which was the first time you could synchronize a computer screen and a TV camera. Remember, you used to get like flickering, and I was the inventor of the first way of synchronizing TV cameras with computer screens. And I made a gadget that did it and made a bit of money out of it. At the time, someone else said, who funnily enough was on a Zoom with me only yesterday. We had a bit of an old boy Zoom. He said, oh, I had that idea too. And I said to him at the time, yeah, but I did something with it. Right. So I think these ideas are what we call a collective consciousness, which is a sort of field that surrounds us all. And that collective consciousness is all thought of all living beings, past, present, and future. That's why you can tap into your own future you, who knows the words you haven't written yet. And so when you get into the receiving of light bulb moment phase, whether you're walking a dog, having a pee, having a shower, all this sort of stuff, right, then you can tap into these ideas. But if you can tap into it, so can everyone else. And there's so many people that have seen a gadget on, I don't know, Dragon's Den or Tomorrow's World and said, oh, I had that idea. Yeah, but you didn't do anything with it.
Yeah.
So I completely concur with you and Elizabeth.
Yeah. So we have to do something with it.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that your book Soul Waves was, well, it was 15 years in the making, because it was actually a book idea you said that you had an idea for 15 years ago, and it actually has only just come out. And we've had discussions about this, and it seems like it waited for our current coronavirus crisis before it was what I call cooked. why do you think it took you so long for Soul Waves to be birthed, when normally you can be so prolific?
That's a great question. There's two reasons for that. The first one is like the left brain reason. I just became a better writer and I became more comfortable about it. The right brain reason is another type of writer's block, which I didn't actually write about in blocks. In blocks, I wrote about the fears and how you can overcome the fears and how you can tap into your creative muse, if you like. But there's another version of writer's block where you get held back, let's say, by unseen forces until it's the right time. And this is a treatise that I explored much later on in books about time. When you tap into this whole brain state, you also tap into, it's like a temporal field where you start to, the perfect things land at the right time. So you become super lucky. And so a lot of the content for Soul Waves, I'd sort of see, I wanted to, I don't know, for example, have dolphins and whales communicate with humans. And then I just saw an article about how dolphins talk to their children by projecting sonar into the brains of their children. And then the brains seem to create images. I thought, right, I'm having that. So, you know, these little gems would just turn up just about a week before I was going to write that bit. Right, so you get into this lovely, comfortable temporal loop where all the information you need for the next chapters, which is like this trust element, just seemed to come in, and very much so with Soul Waves. It was almost like it was supposed to come out this year, and obviously I didn't know about. I've been to Beijing for 3 days on business, but I've never been to Wuhan. I've never been to the Upper Yangtze where it's all set, but it seems to me that's the perfect setting for it, and the Chinese are the right collective bunch of people to be the actors in the book.
How interesting. How interesting. It's like if you're about to buy a Land Rover, you suddenly see lots of Land Rovers, and it's about being in the zone and being receptive. I know that when I'm writing a book, and perhaps I'm not overtly looking for certain bits of information and research, but they do land on me while I am in the process of writing a particular chapter. It always happens like that. So it's about trust and perhaps losing some control and just accepting that it is going to come when the time is right.
And also that the idea you didn't have is a better idea than the idea you thought you had.
Well, yeah, that's a bit mind-bendy. Okay, let's move on to the incredible work that you're doing in meditation, and the fact that you are on Insight Timer, which is an app that I use myself. You have nearly 50,000 followers, which is amazing. I checked it yesterday. It was 49,000 and something, which is really amazing. And I have listened to your meditations on creativity, and I even created my own recently, which I still have to put on Insight Timer. So what part do you think meditation has to play in the elimination of writer's block?
It makes your internal chatter go quiet. So so that could be the inner critic saying, I haven't got time, nobody's going to love this, why am I bothering? And that kind of chatter that goes on in a lot of early writers, or I'm not worthy, or that imposter syndrome. Also, the normal human mind is only capable of having one thought at a time. So let me just mind bend you a little bit here. If you have a thought about the thought you're currently having, the thought you just had replaces the thought you used to have. Right. So this now, funny enough, when you get into the whole brain state, or more specifically, what's called the whole mind state, where all the internal mind centers line up, your gut, your heart, and your root, and there's a crown mind center, and there's a collective mind center above our heads as well. So when you get all of those mind centers lined up, then what happens is you can have multiple streams of consciousness at the same time. And this is the kind of channeling state, which is slightly, actually, now I think about it, or now I let the idea come in, it's slightly different from just the flow state. It's like a super flow state where you've got your focus, which is coming through your keyboard onto your screen, let's say, but you're also tapping into different sources at the same time. So, so meditation is the key that opens the door to these higher states of consciousness by giving you not no thought at all. It's not about not having any thoughts. It's about having a different relationship with your thoughts.
That's very interesting what you've just said. I've always said that I can manage to have two or more compartments open in my brain at once, and be having thoughts processes about all of them. So is that what you're talking about?
Well, it's funny, when you did that, you went left and right. So the two hemispheres can operate absolutely independently. Right, so you can have the right brain doing things while the left brain is doing something else, and that I really recommend. It's a big book. Getting hold of Ian McGilchrist's book, The Master in His Emissary, and he really goes into that in some depth. His notes for that book, and his book took 15 years to write. His notes for that book are bigger than any of my books, just the back end notes.
My goodness.
Exactly.
My goodness, how interesting. So we all need to start meditating. Would you like to just share some of the sorts of content you have on Insight Timer? Because you've got courses, you've got things to do with creativity, things to do with mindfulness. So could you just give us a bit of an overview?
Yeah. Well, some of the early ones that I recorded were procedural. So they're like, follow this step, this step, this step, and you'll get into the meditative state. So that's kind of where I started. And most meditations are of that sort of nature. Then I've got these meditations which are more like guided visualizations. So I've got a lovely one called the Well of Emotions. So you walk through a forest, you go to a clearing,
I love that one.
and there's a well, and it's even got little sound effects. So you bundle up all your guilt, and then you take it and you drop it into the well, it goes splush. And I think I've got an especially loud splush for anger or guilt, one of those anyway. Then they're guided visualizations. I've also got some short stories on there, which you can use Insight Timer to put short stories up, which is great for authors to test material out. There's a poem from Soul Waves up there. There's lots of podcasts. And with your permission, I'd love to upload this podcast to it as well, if that's okay.
Yes, of course.
And so I see Insight Timer not just as a meditation app, but as a social network. It's my first go-to place in the morning for that. So but then on top of all of that, I've got some really transformative meditations which are very, very esoteric and metaphysical, that allow you to reach higher states of consciousness.
So what's the name of those?
Oh, let me give you one. Journey to the Akashic.
Journey to what?
To the Akashic.
The Akashic. I think you're going to have to write some of these down.
All right, I'll put some. The good thing about Insight Timer, they've got these things called deep links, so I can give you a link and it takes you straight into the app. In fact, all the meditations are on the web now anyway, so you can get them.
Perhaps you could add that into the chat.
Yeah, and also I've got things like heartful living, how you move your consciousness to the heart, and how you beam a ray from your heart, which is really powerful, which you can use to heal anybody in the past, present, and future. And the weirdest thing I've done with my heart ray is heal a budgie over Skype who was about to die, who then lived for another 10 years.
I didn't think budgies even lived 10 years.
They've got long lives. I think they're about 30, 40, 50 years. So yeah, so the heart ray is a tangible thing. It's an elevated state of consciousness. If anyone knows things like Reiki and stuff like that, it's a very targeted Reiki-like energy, but it comes out from your heart, and you can send it to yourself back in passing it to yourself in the future. You can use it to get your soulmate, your ideal soulmate, to walk into your life. You can use it to soften tense situations. So you're going to a meeting with lawyers or something like that, you can send your heart rate to the hearts of everyone in that meeting, and you walk into the door and everyone is amenable and soft. Well, you did ask the question.
I did ask the question, and I'm very glad I got the answer. My goodness me. So my last question to you is, do you believe that sometimes it is impossible to get rid of writer's block?
Yeah, some cases of writer's block go very deep. So whether you believe in past lives or not, if you imagine that we've had past lives, you can do amazing things with past life therapy in the present. And if some people have had incredibly deep trauma in the past, and let's say I when I was mentoring writers, I was primarily mentoring female writers, and I had cases of people that felt they'd been burnt at the stake, between a witch and that kind of thing, and And so what I did, so sometimes you just couldn't get rid of that at all from a linear technique. But what I did was a few other techniques which I think you'll approve of, and is one you can write. Say someone wanted to write about this trauma, and they'd manifested a version of it in this life. It's not physical burning at the stake, but being pilloried and what have you, and shamed and what have you, which is now kind of related a bit in the Me Too movement. What you could do is get someone to write for healing purposes, and you change either the from first person to second person, so they're writing about you, or even to third person, or even change it from human into animal and write in metaphor about this thing. So I had a lady in the Middle East who'd had terrible issues with her mother and therefore a daughter as well. And I got her to write the whole story, which she never published, but it healed her, about a family of elephants, matriarchal family of elephants. And she found she could write about that. And another lady who had issues with food, she'd had anorexia and bulimia, and she wrote about a mouse and its cheese being stolen and stuff like that. So I agree with you. There's some cases that are really, really tough, and the normal technique, just reading blocks, wouldn't help them. But with the right techniques and the right therapy and the right care, I think every block can be gone through. And otherwise, why is someone incarnated onto this planet if it isn't to evolve and move through whatever blocks they want to come in? Which, funnily enough, is one of the subjects of the journey to the Akashic Records office.
Interesting. That's very interesting that you say that in your speak, but in my speak, which is perhaps a bit more down to earth, I sometimes help people to write about difficult things by doing exactly that, by either writing it in the third person, by making it a different character. And the other thing I do, I'd be interested to know whether you think that this is also another way through the block, because if you're healing the block that might be the block that might be blocking them as a person, as you said at the beginning of our conversation, that might help to heal the block that is stopping them from writing. I sometimes get people to write a poem instead.
Oh, lovely.
Because a poem is full of metaphor, and a poem is you can allude to things and not be at all specific. And as you write, it is very healing, and you know that you are writing your truth. But you also have the safety net of knowing that if somebody else sees it, it's quite well disguised.
Also, there's another big block, is some people who want to write are not actually very good at writing. They might have dyslexia or dyspraxia or dyscalculia or something like that. So what I did a lot with, so one is mind maps help people with those states. And what I did with a lot of people was get them to speak the stories, just to record it. And I helped my last client I worked with. What we did was I interviewed her over Zoom, and then we sent the Zoom recording up to rev.com. And then rev.com would do a transcription of it, and she'd edit the transcription, and a book came out really quickly. Now she's actually quite a good writer, so she didn't need to use that technique because you couldn't write, but it was a very rapid way of writing a book. So speaking the story can be good, or you might find that, and this is what happened to me. I didn't know that I was a meditation guide, but I found that my books led me to that. So instead of being an author with meditations on the side, I've now become a meditation guide with books on the side, if you like. And also the audiobooks fell into my lap as well, because I found it easy to speak them. It's a great way of proofreading. So you don't just have to write something, even, or speak it. You may find that drawing it is the technique. And then your art tells the story, or you do it in music, or sculpture, or dance, or whatever, or strange TikTok video, or whatever you want to do. So nowadays, often you find, or artists find, that they struggle for many, many years to get their stuff out, and then they find that if they go to a different media, it just absolutely flows, and that's what they were born to do. I love that phrase. It takes all of your life to be an overnight success. I think you might even told me that one.
Yes, I've heard that before. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. I should think the people who are listening to this are quite surprised by the avenue that we've gone down. I do believe that writer's block is something that can be conquered. I am absolutely with Tom when he talks about speaking. because one thing that I think can really help to free people is to accept that their speaking voice is more closely allied to their writing voice than they realize.
Mm-hmm.
And that when you start to speak and you realize, when you see the words you speak transcribed, that actually they flow really well. And okay, you take out the words like okay and really and the extra frills that you don't need, but ultimately you can end up with something that can be much more powerful than if you tried really hard to craft it. And often the things that are easiest to do are the things you are meant to do. I certainly believe that. So that's been really fascinating. So I've finished with my questions. Is there anything else you feel that I should have asked about writer's block that needs to be added to this, Tom?
No, I'd just like to make the observation we didn't set out, and we've never said we should. I think we've sometimes spoken about how we could do a book together or something like that. But if you took this conversation, right, you've actually got the framework of a book there, haven't you?
That's true.
You know what I mean? So you could take so often just speaking to another human being or speaking to yourself is what evokes the stuff. And I think that's a lovely, and I know you do this with you in your writers groups. I think it's really good to be working with other creatives about creating. And I do loads of co-creations now, and I have lots of fun. I'm doing the one right now. I've also now become a musician. So I didn't know I was a musician. So I've done my own ambient music. I used to record to other people's ambient music. And right now, my next track that's coming out is me doing an ambient background. My guitar teacher has recorded a guitar part. And just my birthday this year, I went on a Native American flute lesson. I treated myself to one of these. And I just sent the guitar parts to my flute teacher, and she's now recording some flute parts. So all of a sudden, it all happened by about next week, there'll be me playing some keyboards, a guitarist who's never met a flautist, and a flautist never, and this will all come together. And all of a sudden, you get to the situation where 1 + 1 + 1 = 7.
Mm.
And I mention that again because that's a if you think about the left brain and the right brain being 1 and 1, when you get into the whole brain state, then you get into this sort of 1 + 1 = 3 state, which is great. So yeah, absolutely, co-creation I think is the smart way to do things. And also you find what you're comfortable with, and then you can get other people to do the things that you're not so comfortable with.
Absolutely, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So in order to close this, I would really like to invite people who are listening to ask some questions in the chat, which would probably be easiest for us. If anybody would like to ask anything, and they can go to the chat at the bottom of the screen and ask some questions. In the meantime, I'm going to ask Tom to write down some of these things that he's mentioned. There was the book, and the name of which I've already forgotten, about the brain or the mind.
Oh yeah,
Yes, if you could write that in the chat.
I will do. Actually, I can do better than that.
And also your thing about a cache something that I've forgotten as well. If you could write some of those, that would be great. And if people would like to ask some questions to Tom or to me, then please do so.
Yeah, the book's about 400 or 500 pages long, but have you ever seen these RSA animations? There's an 11-minute animation of the book. It takes and in 11 minutes, the author explains the whole thing. It's got a beautiful animation. I'm just going to share that one.
Okay, thank you.
There you go. Sorry about the long. Oh, hang on, maybe I need to click on it. I think. Hang on, ignore that one.
Go to the.
I'll just put that in there. And while any questions come in,
well, there's Jeremy.
That's a great question.
So
both great questions.
Good one. Okay, Tom, perhaps you could take the first one.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to do. Especially, I'm not multilingual, but what I did find, this is just an example of that. It kind of answers the question in a slightly different way. I've had one of my meditations translated into 7 different languages, and actually meditating to a non-English meditation guide is a great way to get you into another state. And so I'm guessing that applies also, that, you know, if your mother tongue, you can't say things in, and maybe it answers the question about the memoir as well. In fact, Siri's just come in. Siri's one of the people that translated one of my meditations into Norwegian. Absolutely amazing to listen to, and you get into a meditative state really, really, really well. Okay. And so another thing that happened, I did a course once in London on channeling. It was a spiritual group that brought me in to speak about channeling, and a Polish lady a Polish lady came up to me at the end and said, "You cannot do this course in Polish because we don't have the words you have in English to describe the stuff you're talking about." So yeah, different languages can get you into a different state, and they have a different set of things, like, you know, Eskimos having 40 words for snow and all that kind of stuff.
I would just like to add something about different languages. I speak French as well, and I know that I'm a different person in French from the person I am in English. I know that I am an awful lot more saucy when I'm speaking French. And I think that it can open up different parts of ourselves when we do try and write in another language, and in a way it protects us. It's a bit like writing a poem. It can protect you in some way. So I would agree with that. And the overcoming the fear of upsetting family by writing memoirs, Sarah, I know it's a big one. I truly believe that what you have to do is write everything, write the truth, use the right names, write everything as accurately as you can in order to be more vulnerable and be more authentic. And then I think you need to work with a third party who will help you disguise people. Because I really don't think that if you self-edit along the way, I think it will block your flow. So there's some more questions here for you, Tom.
Yep. Yeah, on the upsetting the family side of things, that's when you could write about a family of elephants instead of your own family.
Yes, in order to
that
do
kind of thing.
healing.
Go into metaphor with that one.
Yes.
And Jeremy's talking about the familiar word. Yeah, it's Sanskrit. I've probably got it somewhere. The image on my I wonder if you
in the
put
book?
images. Yeah, I've got my on my computer here, and I've got a file here called blocks. Have I got that actual image? I wonder. Maybe not.
I'm looking in your book to see if it's there.
Do you know what? I haven't got a copy of that book anymore, which is kind of interesting.
Well, you should have.
I should have. I'll tell you what I have got.
Where it is in your book?
About page 1 or I think in the first chapter, just as you turn the page.
The preamble.
No, the first.
This.
So there you go. That is Sanskrit for publish your book. There you go.
There you go.
So it's a hypnotic.
My goodness.
Can I put in the chat window a file? Does anyone know?
Yes, I think you can.
How did you do that then?
I don't know, but I think you can. Hang on. Somebody did. I'm sure somebody did in something else I was doing.
Yeah. Can't see how to do that. Okay, not to worry. Siri, the marvelous Siri. In fact, I was referring to Siri when I said sometimes you can draw things out, because Siri's got an amazing program that helps people with blocks by getting them to literally draw it out. So I highly recommended you get in touch with her. She's also a great illustrator. Illustrated many of my books and many other people's books and what have you. She's asked about writing in tune with the moon. Now this is a bit esoteric, but you know, you're talking before about the by the way, we're okay for time for 2 or 3 minutes, Joe?
Yes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to stop at the top of
you talked before about that idea being up somewhere, and then you bring it down, and if you don't bring it down, it floats back up again.
Yes.
So in one of my books, I talk about the cascade of creativity, and there's the concept is we've got 4 levels of consciousness. We've got the ideas plane, which is just the idea. I've got an idea, I want to write a book. And then you go down to the creative plane and say, well, is it going to be a book? Is it going to be a plane? Is it going to be whatever? And then you come to the formative plane where you get a plan. Okay, I think I'll get this book out by my next birthday or something like that. And then you come down to the physical plane. Now, these are known. These are planes of consciousness. And it's known in esoteric circles that the gap between the new moon and the first quarter is ideal to have those idea thoughts. The gap between the first quarter and the full moon is when you should be having the creative ideas of how you're going to form it. And then the gap between this full moon and the second quarter is when you evaluate them and bring them into some sort of formation. And then you act from second quarter to new moon. And I've written about that in a couple of my books. I think it's in the Lightbulb Moment books. And also I've done a little YouTube video of how you use the moon phase to be creative. So let me just share that with you. That's just there. So I hope that answers your question, Siri. Thanks for asking it.
So then we have a question. Many have told me to write in my speaking voice, and when I sit down to write, it's like ploughing a muddy field.
Oh, that's a great
I
question.
think you kind of asked that. I mean, writing in your speaking voice, you have to record it, and then transcribe it. I've forgotten the name of the app that I've used to do transcription. What was the name of the one that you mentioned, Tom?
Rev.com I use.
Rev.com.
I'll put that
REV.
REV. Little tip for Rev.com. They charge by the minute. And so if you put your file into something like Audacity, a free editor, and say, truncate silence, it takes all your silence out, and you can reduce your Rev.com bills by about 30%.
Right. Well, if nobody understood what on earth Tom was talking about, I did. So if you'd like to email me separately or Tom separately, I'll tell you what he meant with that.
And an idea about the speaking voice. One of my meditations talks about listen to your internal voice and whose accent is it in? Is it your accent or someone else's accent? And also we hear our voice through the bones in our cheeks. So we all sound a bit nasally and thin compared with our real spoken voice. But getting your voice out there is one of those hurdles to get over. I didn't think anyone wanted to listen to me for years. So you get this imposter syndrome, don't you? So who want to listen to me? And it took me on Insight Timer, it took me to get to 1 million listens from my meditations. I was, you know what? They might be quite good then. Yeah, so I needed the social proof to give me a kick up the proverbial.
Yes, I think I'm a firm believer that one of the best ways to get over writer's block is to get over the hurdle of daring to share.
Yeah.
Which is a hurdle in itself. I know some people who've written many books and have never shared any of them and never published any of them.
Mm-hmm.
But when you dare to share in a safe environment, and then you encourage people and accept the feedback that you're given, you don't have to accept it all. You take some of it with a grain of salt. That starts to, excuse me, build your confidence. And as your confidence builds, you become more able to get into the zone. So I think that sharing is a really good way. And I also think that when you share verbally, like I do in my writers' circles, people can hear your voice, and very often the reaction that you get can help you to dare to do more writing.
Well, let me answer that earlier question you said about why Soul Waves on right now. And I don't think I've shared this with anybody, so I'm just putting my heart on my sleeve and sharing this. My first 2 books, Blocks and Lightful Moments, were more like workshop manuals. So here's a chapter, here's some exercises, here's a chapter, here's some exercises. Then I wrote 2 books on metaphysics, about the tarot. Then I wrote some books on my pure philosophy, what I thought about the world. And then I wrote some more deeper books about metaphysics and mindfulness and that sort of stuff. And so each time I became braver and braver and braver. And Soul Waves has got all the stuff in it. Soul Waves is full of everything that's not in the other 15 books. So that's why now.
Yeah, I would agree that we get braver and braver and braver. And I think that one of the things that we need to be brave about to start with, but that actually reaps more rewards than anything, is speaking your truth and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And when you start to do that, it resonates with more of the readers. People don't judge you for who you are. They only actually see themselves in your stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you dare to be vulnerable, which is what I did in my book, Monday Morning Emails, sharing things I had never shared with many people, things I hadn't even shared with some of my best friends, and the response we got and the thanks and the tears and people saying, thank you for daring to write about how difficult it can be living overseas, living in constant limbo, and your kids having issues and that sort of thing. I realized that it may have been the bravest thing I had ever done, but it was the best thing I'd ever done. And the more vulnerable and authentic I can be, the more it helps other people.
Could I share then just one other thing then, is that in Insight Timer there's about 6,000 meditation guides and hundreds or thousands and thousands of meditations. So it can be quite hard to find the meditations for you. Yesterday I curated 10 meditations to help people with the lockdown specifically. So here they are, free gift for everybody who's listening in.
Oh yes, I saw that yesterday.
Share them and
share them. Share it. Yeah.
And today I've just recorded, and I'll be sharing it tomorrow, a brand new meditation called The Art of Mindfulness to help everyone through
wine
this.
with a W.
Mindfulness, yes, coming out soon. Keep an eye on it.
Sounds great. Okay, so I think we've just about reached the end of this. I would like to thank Tom very much indeed. I have recorded this. I will be posting it on my websites. Tom says he will put it on Insight Timer. It will be available for other people. Do share it. I hope it's been helpful. I'm not quite sure that I'm going to find the time to turn it into a book, though. Indeed, this sort of conversation can become a book. It can certainly become the bones of a book. So that was a great idea there. And thank you all very much for listening. I hope it's been helpful. Don't forget that I have more online things that are going on lately. I'm just going to put something into the chat here for you about some of my other things that are going on. I'm going to be doing an interview every single week. I'm doing online writers circles. I'm doing a speed write live. I'm even running some workshops. So don't miss out. They're not going to happen forever. They're just happening during this lockdown period. If you want to make sure you don't miss out on any of the things I'm doing, go to my website, joparfitt.com, look at the virtual events page, sign up to my monthly Inspiring newsletter that's free, and then you won't miss out on anything. Thank you all very much for listening, and thank you, Tom. Is it wine time there already?
It's an unconscious suggestion to people that are listening.
And thank you very, very much, Tom, for sharing your wisdom. And I do urge everybody to go and find him on the Insight Timer and listen to some of his incredible work. Thank you
so much, Jo. It's been a real joy and a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.